The paint is faded, the miles are high, and nobody wants this 350Z. But 2 decades ago, this exact car was the last hope of a company that was about to die. The man who let it exist had a nickname, and it was not a kind one. He earned it by cutting deeper than anyone expected. And then he made the one decision no accountant would ever approve. The 350Z is everywhere on the used market right now. It sits in listings with faded paint, high miles, and prices that make it one of the cheapest rear-wheel drive sports cars you can buy today. Most buyers scroll right past it. They see a disposable toy, a drift build waiting to happen, or just another rough Japanese coupe from the 2000s. But that listing is hiding something. This isn't a rare car, and it isn't a collectible. It's the vehicle you buy when you want rear-wheel drive, a manual gearbox, and a V6 for the price of a used economy sedan. And that is the injustice at the heart of this story. To understand how a car this good became a car this cheap, you have to understand what Nissan was willing to do to survive. If you want the story of how the cheapest sports car in America pulled a company back from bankruptcy, hit subscribe because it only gets stranger from here. 1999 was the year Nissan almost died. The company was carrying more than $20 billion in interest-bearing automotive debt. Only 3 of the 46 models it sold in Japan were turning a profit. The fiscal year then underway would end with a consolidated net loss of about $6.5 billion. Nissan wasn't just trimming fat, it was fighting for survival. The product line had become rational, conservative, and forgettable. Customers walked into showrooms and walked out remembering nothing. Without a sports car, Nissan was becoming a maker of commodity transportation. And commodity transportation doesn't inspire employees, doesn't draw customers, and doesn't save a company. Renault saw an opportunity and a risk. It took a controlling stake of roughly 37% in Nissan, assuming billions of dollars of the company's debt in the process. That deal was one of the boldest moves in European automotive history, because Renault was betting on a company that most analysts considered fundamentally broken. The merger would create the Renault-Nissan alliance, but first, Nissan had to survive. Louis Schweitzer, the head of Renault, sent a man named Carlos Ghosn. Ghosn had already earned a nickname in the European press. They called him Le Cost Killer. He had earned it at Renault, where he cut costs the way other executives trimmed budgets. In October 1999, Ghosn unveiled the Nissan Revival Plan. The numbers were brutal. Roughly 21,000 jobs were cut worldwide, 5 plants were closed in Japan, and purchasing costs were slashed by about 20%. The plan targeted a return to profitability by fiscal year 2000, an operating margin above 4.5% by fiscal year 2002, and a 50% debt reduction. This wasn't a gentle restructuring. This was survival surgery, and every rule of turnaround management said the sports car program should be the first thing on the chopping block. Ghosn became the chief operating officer of Nissan and set to work immediately. He didn't wait for consensus. He set deadlines, demanded accountability, and made it clear that meeting the plan's objectives was not optional. The Japanese workforce had never seen a foreign executive move this fast or cut this deep. The man they sent to save Nissan had a nickname, and it was not a kind one. He had earned it. The man who saved Nissan would not get a hero's ending, but that comes later. The 300ZX was gone. By 1996, there was no Z car for sale in America at all. The Z32 had become a victim of the yen-to-dollar exchange rate, which pushed its price so high it was effectively priced out of the market. For the first time since the Z arrived in America, Nissan had no Z car in its lineup. That meant no halo product, no aspirational coupe, and nothing that made employees proud to work at Nissan. The absence wasn't just a gap in the showroom, it was a symptom of everything that had gone wrong. Nissan had stopped building cars that people dreamed about. And a company that nobody dreams about is a company that nobody remembers. The Z badge had been the emotional center of the brand since the Datsun 240Z arrived in 1969. It was the car that proved Nissan could build something exciting, affordable, and iconic. Without it, the brand was hollow. Here's the part almost nobody knows. The Z wasn't Ghosn's idea at all. It came from Jerry Hirschberg, who ran Nissan Design America, and his team had been working on it in their free time long before Ghosn ever set foot in the building. Hirschberg believed something deeper had died when Nissan let the Z go. He thought it had taken a piece of the company's soul with it. So his studio kept sketching, kept building models, kept the idea alive even though nobody asked them to. By the summer of 1998, the concept was polished enough to show at internal roadshows. Executives saw it, nobody killed it, but nobody funded it either. Then in the spring of 1999, Chairman Yoshikazu Hanawa gave the design studio permission to keep developing it, even as the company bled money. Ghosn arrived that same year as chief operating officer, walked through the design studio during one of his early tours, and Hirschberg made his pitch right there. This was the car, he said, that could bring back what Nissan had lost. Ghosn folded his hands. He frowned. He paused long enough that people in the room braced for the rejection. Then he said one word. Done. He set a condition. It had to come in under $30,000, no turbochargers, no four-wheel steering, and it had to share as many parts as possible with cars already in production. Keep it honest, keep it cheap to build. Why would a man cutting 21,000 jobs say yes to a sports car nobody asked him to fund? Because Ghosn had owned a 300ZX himself. He knew what the car meant, and he understood that a company fighting for its life still needs something people can believe in. A car in the showroom that makes an employee proud to work there and makes a customer walk in the door. Now they had to build it, and fast. A Z concept had already appeared at the Detroit show in 1999, designed by Nissan's California studio and originally powered by a four-cylinder. At a press conference in February 2000, Ghosn announced that Nissan would build the production car. He said it would help the company's recovery. They chose the FM platform, a front midship layout that placed the engine behind the front axle line for better balance. That platform was shared with the Infiniti G models, which kept development costs under control while still delivering the right proportions. The engine was the 3.5-liter VQ35DE V6, a power plant already in production across the Nissan and Infiniti lineup. It produced 287 horsepower and 274 pound-feet of torque. The rear wheels drove the car. Both a close ratio 6-speed manual and a 5-speed automatic were available. Independent multi-link suspension sat at all four corners. The target price was under $30,000. The target 0 to 60 time was in the mid-5-second range. If they missed either target, the whole project would look like a waste of money during a debt crisis. The philosophy was simple. Build an honest sports car, not an exotic. Use shared parts where you can, but tune them like a Z. The body used a high damping design that gave it more torsional and bending stiffness than the 300ZX it replaced. Aerodynamic work focused on zero lift at high speed, not just low drag. Every choice balanced cost and character. Nissan wasn't building a no-expense-spared halo machine. It was building a disciplined revival of what the original 240Z had been. Performance and style at a price real people could reach. The 350Z entered production in 2002. It went on sale in the United States in August of that year as a 2003 model. The base price in America was roughly $26,269. Nissan had set out to build a $50,000 sports car and sell it for under $30,000. The flagship track model topped out at $34,079. If that ambition held up, the 350Z would undercut the Corvette by thousands while delivering similar dynamics. The car came with the same 3.5-liter V6, making 287 horsepower at 6,200 RPM. Rear-wheel drive was standard. The front and rear suspension was fully independent. It could pull 0 to 60 in mid-5-second territory. Reviewers immediately drew the parallel to the original 240Z. Here was a Nissan sports car that offered near Corvette dynamics for thousands less. It wasn't a luxury coupe. It wasn't a technology showcase. It was a return to the formula that had made the Z name matter in the first place. Power, balance, and a price that invited you to buy it. The orders proved the point. Nissan opened pre-sale orders in January before the full specifications were even public, and took roughly 6,500 of them. In the first full year, sales exceeded 30,000 units in America alone. The car was working, and so was the turnaround. What is the most underappreciated car of the last 25 years? The one people still sleep on that deserves far better than it gets. The 350Z has a strong claim. Drop yours below and defend it. Nissan returned to profitability within the first year of the revival plan. The debt reduction targets were met ahead of schedule. The 350Z wasn't the sole reason for this, and no honest account would give it all the credit. But it was the emotional centerpiece of the recovery. It gave employees something to be proud of. It gave customers a reason to walk into a Nissan showroom and look up from the economy sedans. It gave the brand a pulse. The GT-R would come later, but the Z was the first proof that Nissan could still build something exciting under Ghosn's watch. It was the signal that the turnaround wasn't just about cuts, it was about belief. And belief is harder to measure than profit, but it's just as necessary. The halo effect spread beyond the sports car itself. The FM platform that underpinned the 350Z also spawned the Infiniti G models, which became major profit drivers for Nissan's luxury division. The shared V6 engine family lowered costs across multiple product lines. What started as a bet on emotion turned into a sound engineering investment that paid dividends across the portfolio. That's what happens when a cost killer understands that not every cut makes you stronger. An entire generation learned the shape of this car before they ever learned its name. In 2004, Need for Speed Underground 2 hit shelves. Rachel Teller's modified 350Z was lent to the player at the start of the game, and the car became a centerpiece of the experience. It also appeared in Underground, Underground Rivals, Carbon, and Heat. For millions of teenagers, the 350Z was the first rear-wheel drive sports car they ever controlled. They learned its proportions, its engine note, and its tail-happy handling before they had a driver's license. But almost none of them learned the story. They knew the shape from a loading screen, not from a boardroom. They knew the exhaust note from a video game, not from a factory that had been scheduled for closure. This is the recognition moment. If you played Underground 2, you drove this car before you could legally drive anything in real life. You knew the body kit and the sound at 6,000 RPM before you knew what RPM meant. But the game never told you what Nissan was going through when they built it. It never told you about the $20 billion in debt, the 5 closed plants, or the man who fled Japan in a box. The car became a cultural icon without its origin story. And that disconnect is exactly why so many people today scroll past it in listings without a second thought. They recognize it, they just don't respect it. The man who saved Nissan didn't get a hero's ending. Ghosn became CEO in June 2001, and for years he was hailed as a corporate savior in Japan. He was featured in manga comics and management textbooks. Then in November 2018, he was arrested in Japan on suspicion of financial misconduct. prosecutors accused him of understating his annual salary and misusing company funds. Ghosn denies all charges. He was never convicted. In December 2019, while out on bail and awaiting trial, he escaped. He was concealed in a large case for audio equipment, with air holes punched in it, and carried onto a private jet by a former Green Beret named Michael Taylor and 2 accomplices. Under the terms of his bail, Ghosn had been barred from even meeting his wife. He's been living in Lebanon ever since. Lebanon doesn't extradite its citizens to Japan, so the savior became a fugitive. The arc is shocking, but the facts remain disputed. The charges exist as filings from Japanese prosecutors. The denial exists as Ghosn's repeated defense. The escape exists as one of the most bizarre corporate stories of the decade. And the man who said one word and let the Z live is still living in exile. This isn't the end of the story, but it is the end of the man. The car outlived the controversy. The 350Z kept selling, kept racing, and kept appearing in driveways long after Ghosn lost his title, his freedom, and his reputation. The car he saved became more durable than the legacy of the man who saved it. That's the strange justice of machines. They don't care who made them or what happened to that person later, they just keep running. Which leaves one question. If this car did all that, why can you buy one for the price of a used sedan? The answer isn't failure. The 350Z was a commercial success. Nissan sold it in high volumes, and high-volume cars rarely become blue-chip collectibles. The aftermarket embraced it so completely that truly clean, unmodified examples are now harder to find than modified ones. The 1990s Japanese halo cars, the Supra and the R34 GT-R, have climbed far out of reach. The 350Z did not follow them. It remains one of the cheapest ways to buy a rear-drive, naturally aspirated manual sports car, and it is a fraction of what its contemporaries now command. The injustice isn't that the car failed, it's that the world forgot what it did. It's that a generation recognizes the outline from a video game, but not the story from a boardroom. It's that the emotional centerpiece of Nissan's greatest turnaround now sits in rough listings, waiting for a buyer who sees it as nothing more than cheap horsepower. The 350Z is cheap because the world forgot what it did. If you like the untold stories behind the cars everyone thinks they know, subscribe and hit the bell. And if you want to know why Yamaha's race engine ended up in Ford's family sedan, watch this video next.